We're joined today by Chip Bernhard, pastor for a long, long time. Chip, how long have you actually been a pastor? I don't want to. I
Um,
don't want to overstate.
how old are you, Brian?
I just turned 44 this week.
Well, I started pastoring the year before you were born.
So there's a
Okay,
lot.
how does that put it in perspective? So 45 years,
45 years.
almost within a few weeks of 45 years complete by the time I kind of finished my role as the lead pastor there at Spring Creek Church. So 45 years exactly.
And Chip, one of the things you said as we were chatting earlier, I loved. You said you've got me beat on both failures and
Yeah.
successes,
Well,
and
I
someday I
do.
hope to catch up in both.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you probably will in the failures because we're all fallen. But yeah, I hope you have a few wins along the way
I
too.
appreciate that. So, hey, Chip, today we're really looking at one of the tensions that pastors often carry is this tension between staying close enough to people to care for them and lead them with clarity. So we know this. Some pastors are deeply, deeply relational. They love their people. They remain accessible. They're trusted by them. But sometimes that care can make it difficult to challenge people, to address unhealthy behavior, or even to lead the church toward change. Other pastors, and you know them and maybe have been one, are far more decisive. They're driven. They know where the church needs to go, but they may move so quickly that they fail to consider the relational impact of their decisions. And and I think we're going to make the assertion, have the conversation. Neither of those describes healthy pastoral leadership on its own. So the phrase that we really want to explore today is close enough to care, clear enough to lead. So, what does it look like for a pastor to care for people faithfully while still leading with clarity and courage that a healthy church requires? So, I want to just start off. I know you've told us, you've said before that you have regularly told your congregation that you loved them and that they believed you. So, what made that love credible?
Well, the reason I know they believe me is on your farewell service at a church, which is almost like a funeral. Um, it came up over and over again. So, I mean, I can. It was humbling. It was awkward, but what made them know I care was I showed up when they needed me. What made them know that I cared is I wept with them when they wept. We just had a leader in our church, his wife, 56 years old, just passed. And I got to the hospital minutes after she passed. I happened to send a text, and God did that. I mean, the timing of that was all the Lord's because I wasn't that smart. But so I think it means that. I think it means um, you're in the foyer and they share a burden, and you put a hand on their shoulder and you say, "Let me pray about that right now." I think it means a text with a Bible verse or an email, a short burst of an email saying, "I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you." I think it means making sure that staff or pastor gatherings, you're praying for the needs of the congregation constantly. Every every leadership meeting of pastors or deacons or elders or anybody organized um, at the beginning was a extended time of prayer for the flock under our care and their needs. It sent a message to everybody that this is important. And besides that, we're commanded to do it. And so it's just learning. You can't do everything for everybody, and I didn't visit everybody, but pastors did, other people did. I could when I was able to, and it's a I learned this a long time ago, Brian. It's a look, it's a touch, and it's a word. That if you can look somebody in the eyes, maybe appropriately touch, a handshake, a hand on a shoulder, and it's a kind, compassionate word, a scripture, somehow to let them know that I care. Um, and Brian, I had to learn how to do that. That's not probably my default. I would lean more towards the let's get her done kind of personality type. Um, and I learned probably the hard way that you can get things done and nobody's with you,
Mm.
and there's body parts everywhere. And you really didn't gain the ground you thought you were going to gain by getting there.
I love the simplicity of it's a look, it's a touch, it's a word. I was coached early on that when I was in the lobby or when I was walking through the lobby that I was walking through with too much purpose to get from point A to point B. I was missing the people. If they'd stopped to talk to me, my body language was communicating that I would like for this conversation to be over as soon as possible. And
And you're not
we
the only one that has struggled
we've
with
all
that.
we've all done that.
Yeah, yeah.
I was coached by a wise mentor who said, "Just turn your feet towards the person you're talking to." And I realized the value of that simple little act was instead of my feet pointing the direction that I wanted to go and I'm turning my body to say, "Yeah, yeah, of course." If I just take the turn my whole body aligned with this conversation, it changed. And people started noticing that, and it was a warm and a loving and a kind thing, and I didn't even realize that I wasn't doing that. Sometimes it's just the
No,
body
you
language
don't.
betrays the heart attitude inside.
Well, your friend did you a favor, right? Because that's fixable. He gave you a tip that made you better that you could do. It's not like your personality is such that you couldn't do it. I have a leader that I highly respected who would shake your hand and then turn his head, and it was awful. Like
Yeah, and
somebody.
probably entirely unintentional,
No, he
but
had no idea he was doing it.
yeah,
Um, and it was I was in college, and it wasn't my place to do it, but I'll never forget it. And I kind of learned, and I actually went to a seminar many, many, many years ago, probably 40 some years ago. And I learned that little truth. And I decided in between services, when you're doing 2 and 3 services or before the service, I hate interruptions. I hate them. I can't stand them. I try to avoid them. But when they happen, I got a choice to make. A look, a word, and a touch can help absorb it, and then I can move on to get to what I need to do. Um, or I can offend the person by not engaging.
yeah. So let me ask you. You referenced that sometimes if you are a getter done and you are so focused on taking ground that you leave people behind, they're not with you, and you realize you haven't taken the ground that you thought. Let's talk to the pastors that are on that side of the equation for a second, that are more driven. Some pastors are listening to this and they're going, "This is the easy part for me," and other pastors are going, "I will never
Right.
learn this." So for the pastors that are on the side of driven, focused, get it done, talk to me about a time when you realized that the relational trust, the love of the congregation and for the congregation that you had built up over time actually helped the church walk through something different.
Well, great question. And there's probably a couple of answers that I think of. One, I'll never forget my church where I grew up, and my mom and dad continued to go after I graduated from college and seminary and went off on my own. And they got a very famous person come in to be their preacher, and he was a very good pulpiteer. I mean, really, really good. And I kind of liked that. I'm a seminary graduate, and I'm like, he's deep, and it's just great. And one day my mom said to me on the phone, I'll never forget it. She said, "Chip, he doesn't love us." And I went, "Well, what's the like?" My first thought was, "How do you know? Like, what's the big deal?" Like, and that theme came over and over again over the next several months and or years. And that man did exactly what you just described. He was headed somewhere, but he had nobody following him. And I was able to see that. That was a defining moment in the journey for me. And so that deeply impacted me. There would be 1,000 of these, Brian. I'll think of one more just to share. Part of our journey has been I inherited a very old church. I think we're 145 years old now. It had lots of traditions and lots of legalism. And I was kind of brought in by the leadership to change that. I had their support, and I knew it going in. And so part of this journey was we'd outgrown our facility after 5 or 6 years. We started looking for property. Our name of our church was Garfield Baptist Church. It used to be down on Garfield Avenue in downtown Milwaukee, and we moved to the suburbs long before my time. And they said, "We'll change the name, but let's just drop the avenue, and we'll get around to change the name somewhere." And they didn't. They never came back to it. So I inherited a church, Garfield Baptist Church. And often people would ask, "Why did you name your church after an irreverent cartoon?" Like, what? They didn't even know Garfield was a former president's name. And that's how it happened. And there's a long story about history here even in Wisconsin and Milwaukee. But I realized that if we were going to make headway in our community with the religious, we needed to change the name. Both Garfield and Baptist weren't helping us. We actually bought a professional study. We paid people thousands of dollars to survey people. What do you hear when you hear the word Baptist? And in Wisconsin, and this is not true everywhere, and I don't believe that's true in the South and other places. The largest Baptist church in Wisconsin was pastored by a homosexual woman whose moral behavior is deplorable. And that's what many people in Wisconsin thought a Baptist church was. Which was, just for the record, that wasn't what we were or are. So we actually had to have data to prove that. And so we had a big vote, and I was all excited. We're going to change the name. And the vote happened that day. I gave my life's blood. I met with groups, and I listened to opposition. I met over and over again by the weeks and months. And it came to the vote, and the vote failed by 4 votes to change the name. And I found out that there was about a dozen votes that had been cast by people in nursing homes who had been declared incompetent, mentally incompetent. And that people went to their place and they took their hand and voted no. And so we had to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to accept this vote or declare it null and void? Attorneys told me we could clearly. And I showed up at the meeting that day, and I worked through it with leaders. Obviously, it wasn't just my decision, but I said, I don't have any peace about doing that. I think we accept this as of the Lord. And I stood up that night, somewhat emotional and crushed. And I said, I'm very disappointed. I think we've missed a great opportunity to impact our community. But you have spoken. And I accept it. I told them that 12 votes had been cast illegally, but that we weren't going to win on a technicality. And I said this: if you will have me as your pastor, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work at what God called us to do. And it was passionate. It was probably had tears in my eyes. And the church all got up and stood, both sides who voted yes and voted no. We were split terribly. And they gave me a standing ovation. That day, I earned the respect of both sides of the church. Now, looking back, I didn't know it at the time, but so shortly thereafter, people who were passionate about the name change said, I get it now, Pastor Chip, I get it. Like, why don't you do it again? And I said, if you think I may be a lot of things, but I am not crazy. I will not do this again. I'll never do it again as long as I live.
Yeah.
This hurt too deeply. I took it too personal. And so to make a long story short, many of the people who voted no went on a passionate pilgrimage to change the name. And I said, if you can get people to buy in, I'll lead it at the end, but I'm not doing this anymore. It passed the next time we tried it, which was almost 2 years later, it passed 99% in favor of changing the name.
Wow.
I think the reason is because I didn't ram it through, okay? So, there may be times to ram something through, and there may be a pastor who has a different story. But, I from that day on, I think I earned credibility that allowed me to do a lot of other things where they just trusted. I earned their trust.
I love that example of how genuine care, genuine love, genuine patience, and a desire to bring people along changes the way a pastor leads, and it helps him recognize what people may be carrying. You know, the 140 years of history now suddenly in a name change, is that heritage lost? That's a fearful thing. I mean, there's so much that goes into that.
And that was yeah, my parents were married here, my
Yeah.
dad was buried here, like, I heard all of those stories. Wes Huff, he's kind of, an apologist, but I just read this recently, I knew we were gonna have this conversation. He said this, "If your theological convictions are not making you more gracious,
Mm.
humble, and repentant than your beliefs, then" say it again. "If your theological convictions are not making you more gracious, humble, and repentant, then your beliefs are not being shaped by Jesus. They are motivated by a desire to be argumentatively right." And that fits, doesn't that fit exactly what we're
Yep,
talking about here?
it does.
I think you can win votes. I think you can cram it through, but a shepherd has to know the condition of his flock. And I mean, that's one of the qualifications of a pastor. And therefore you have to go a little slower maybe than what us highly motivated people might want to do.
Well, so talk me through that because I think care can sometimes introduce maybe another difficulty that a pastor can care so much about the depth of a relationship or a person that he can become now reluctant to disappoint or challenge the person. It can lead to lack of clarity in leadership. Well, I kind of know what I want to say, but I'm afraid it will hurt you, so I won't say it clearly, and maybe you'll just get it through osmosis. Or it can lead to a lack of courage in leadership where, hey, I'm afraid to confront, I'm afraid to bring accountability to a staff member, I'm afraid to challenge. So let me ask, when is it that this caring component can kind of come out of balance and maybe make it harder for a pastor to lead with clarity and with courage?
Well, I mean, leadership is all about the art of that balance. Okay. It's that's it. You just nailed it. Um, and when it gets out of balance, either way, you're asking for trouble. And let me also say, we also know from history that even those in perfect balance, not everybody likes it. Okay. I mean, there have been decisions people didn't like that I think were perfectly balanced. There are people who are going to leave the church even when it's perfectly balanced. So this isn't a guarantee of a smooth life necessarily. But I mean, I think there's parents have to do this. All right.
Mm,
What
yeah,
what hills am I going to die on?
yeah.
Like, are you going to eat your dinner or not? And or are you going to slap your mother in the face or aren't you? And a dad has to decide, is that something, even though I adore my kids, I love them to death, but is that something I can let go, or is that something I have to make sure they know you will never do that to your mother again?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I I think if it's a violation of scripture, you have to confront it. I mean, that's what
Yep.
pastors do.
Yeah.
I mean, and you do it in love, but if you love them, you want them right with God. And so if you don't love them, you let them go on in their sin. But it's hard. It's very, very hard. You screw up all the courage you have, even for those of us who might be wired a little on the stronger leadership side of this. I'm telling you, it's always hard. And if it isn't, maybe something um, is
We'll
wrong with
we'll
you.
get to that. We'll get to that,
Yeah,
pastor, in a minute.
yeah, yeah. But I also think a pastor shapes the culture, and it's what you allow or what you let go. And occasionally a shepherd has to say, we don't do that here. No, we do this. And for me and our, um, part of that was leading that with our leaders, our staff, our lay leaders. And when I would see them, um, get mad at somebody else, for instance, this happens in human world, it happens. And, and two pastors weren't speaking to each other. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I could tell it, the tension was in the room. And, I said to the room, "There's a couple of you guys in here who are not speaking to each other. And I know that there's a misunderstanding. I know that there's probably a plain old disagreement, but here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna postpone this meeting for an hour, and the two of you who are not speaking, you're gonna go in your office, and the two of you are gonna talk it out. If you have to duke it out, duke it out. And, I'm gonna come down in about 40 minutes, and I'm gonna see how you're doing. And if you're not to the point where you're reconciled, then we can't lead this church forward with pastors who won't speak to each other."
Hmm.
Um, that kind of defined the kind of culture our pastoral staff would have, for the rest of our time there. And there were other times where we had to say, no, 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 no. Look, the one thing, pastors are going to be unified. We may not agree on everything, but we're going to be unified. We can't expect the church to be unified if the pastors aren't unified. So I I just think there are certain areas that are just too important. You can't let that behavior. Somebody says, "Chip, I will have the greeters ready at the door this Sunday," and the greeters aren't there. Okay, he didn't do his job.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk me through. You said so. You've referenced, a staff member verbal agreement. This is what's expected of me, and I didn't meet that expectation. You've referenced biblical mandates. Clear scriptural guidelines. You've referenced interpersonal. When you think about the things that you're like, yes, this is worth overcoming all my trepidation about confrontation. What is that list that comes to mind? Because you also said, eating your peas, maybe not the end of the world. We can have a conversation, but where is it? What are the hills you're willing to die on?
Well, biblical issues and or of disunity. Um, I would, I have confronted people for gossip. Um, I, I, I confronted a dear woman who knew I loved her. She was a youth leader, and probably 10 years older than I was, and I was in my 30s. And I remember this like it was yesterday. They were outside my office, outside. She was talking to another man in our church, and they talked for 2 hours and 20 minutes. And they were giggling and laughing, and nothing immoral was said, but it was headed the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had this sense of, God, you put this at my window. I heard it. Now, am I going to let this turn into an affair and then wish I'd have said something? Or am I going to love her enough to say? And so I took a risk. And I, when she was done, I called her in. I had strict rules about a woman in my office. The door was open, and I wouldn't do it more than twice without having somebody else in the room. So, I was very, very careful about that. But I told her what I had just observed, and I said, "That's not healthy." And she looked at me, she turned red, started to cry, and she said, "Thank you." And eventually she left. To this day, when I see her, she looks me in the eye and she thanks me. In fact, they came to Wisconsin and wanted to see us, and we insisted that they stay at our home. She brought it up again 30 years later.
What's interesting is I think a lot of times pastors might view that story and go, okay, I was supposed to do it if it ended up successfully. Like if it ended up with the story that Chip has. And if I
Okay.
do it and it ends in conflict and now somebody thinks I've overstepped my boundaries and there's tension and they're gonna leave the church because I made an accusation, that didn't have any
I got you.
foundation or something, that
And
then,
I have
oh,
that too. I have
yeah,
that too. I had to confront a lady that was gossiping about a man and implying moral infidelity and implying it, and called her in with her husband and with a couple of other leaders in the church. It wasn't just one-on-one, for sure. I had plenty of data. I had lots of witnesses that had heard these things and their names. I graciously told how much I loved her. It's because I loved her I'm bringing this up. She blew up. This is the family I loved. I had spent hours with, and they left the church.
yeah, and that's a brutal outcome,
It hurt. It
awful.
hurts. It hurts telling you about it.
Yeah, and still, after all these time, right? Because you think of what was actually there, what was the heart behind it. It's the love of wanting what's best for the person, even when they don't necessarily realize it or want to receive that. And I think that's the reality is that pastoral love does not always guarantee that clarity or that courage will be welcomed.
I'll
That's
say
the
this
work of the
about
Spirit.
her. I don't know how many years later. I don't keep track. Let's say 15. A long time. They're Her daughter and husband still go to our church. They came to visit, and I was out in the foyer, and they came over and with their head down like this to me and wondered what I would do. And I went up to them, to her husband first, and then to her. Well, I gave him a group hug, like one, and I said, I'm so glad you're here. Them walking over to me was the closest thing I was ever going to get to an apology. And they're not joining our church. They moved out of town. They don't even go to
Sure.
our church. They don't even
Yeah.
live in our state anymore. But our relationship was somewhat reconciled, and I give them a lot of credit for having the courage to come over and greet me. And I think it took humility on her part. But I'll tell you what, man, it hurt like the dickens, and other people were mad at me, and, they never knew even what the issue was. The congregation
Isn't that
never knew.
isn't that amazing?
Just that
Anger without
just
any sort of
Ch
context.
Chip
Yeah.
ran people out of the church. That was what was going around.
Mm. Well, not
I
not on
kind
purpose.
No, no, their
But
behavior ran them. Their
in order to
behavior ran
protect
them
the
out of
flock,
the
correct,
church.
in order to
Yeah,
protect the flock, yeah.
and I just had a job to do. But
Yeah.
yes, Brian,
And
it's a
I
good point.
And because I think that faithful care is measured by the pastor's motive, which we should always check in front of the Lord, the posture, and obedience. And it's not about whether the person necessarily responds favorably that says, yeah, this was the right decision. It's right before the Lord first, and then in discernment with others. And then the response is up to the believer and their willingness to submit and to the truth of God's word and to the prompting of the Spirit. I think Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's one more thing. The Bible gives us some of these illustrations. Mark and I've been reading through some in Acts, and we're talking about it. This Sunday, I'm teaching a life group on Aquila and Priscilla. They confronted Apollos that his doctrine was not right. That was not easy for them. I'm sure it wasn't easy, but Apollos apparently was a powerhouse preacher, like gifted by God. And if they knew if he didn't get this theological issue right, it was going to damage his ministry. They loved him enough to confront him. He had enough character to listen, and Apollos ends up, pardon the expression, a rock star. I mean, like
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
successful. God uses him.
Right.
And if Priscilla and Aquila hadn't confronted him, he would have never been. Barnabas, the son of encouragement. We all think Barnabas, but all he did was going around telling everybody how great they were. He called Paul out a couple of times. So there are times when a leader has to say, what you're doing, I love you, but your behavior is not right. and let's talk about it. And I've always tried to say, I've done the same thing or worse. The issue isn't that you're a worse sinner than me.
Right, right.
The issue is I'm responsible now. I've seen it, and I want to help you because I don't want you to end up in a ditch somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think about a church that doesn't ever do that, and what does that ultimately lead to?
Well,
It's
you
not a
know
great
what it
not a
leads
great
to.
place. Yeah.
The church blows up.
Yep.
It implodes, and it's not healthy.
Yeah.
It can't be sustained long.
No, you're absolutely right. Not in a healthy way.
No,
There's another side of this tension that we're talking about, this tension between the pastor that deeply desires to care and shepherd and love, and the pastor that wants to drive things forward and trying to find the way that we can come to the middle of this and lead well with love. Some pastors don't struggle to make decisions. They don't struggle to do the hard thing. They're clear, they're driven, they're ready to move. But that clarity can become detached from the care for the people affected by it. So let me ask, what happens when a pastor becomes so focused on moving the church forward that people no longer feel genuinely shepherded?
he he thinks he's moving them forward, but he's not. Okay, you can probably get the building built or the project done or whatever it is whatever the
The
next
name
thing is on
changed.
the name changed. But you're kidding yourself if you think I can show up, tell them, here's what I want you to do it, suckers, and go back into your office and figure out the next thing and come out and tell them, here's the next thing I want him to do. Um, I'm just going to say you can do that for several years. You can get away with it. But I don't know how long, there's no magic formula, but I can tell you it will blow up. It will blow up because sheep have feelings and sheep are tender, sheep are sick, sheep are hurting, and I think maybe more so today than ever before. Homes are a mess and dysfunctional, and these are the people who show up at our churches, sitting in our pews and chairs. And i- if there ever was a time where we need more love and shepherding, it's to address all of this pain and dysfunction of the people that are showing up at our doorsteps. Those pastors with strong agendas, like me, um, want to rail it through, need to hear that they need a guy like you had, Brian, to show you, turn your feet. They need a guy like told me, it's a look, it's a word, it's a touch. They need somebody to help them slow it down, look people in the eye, weep with those who weep, laugh with those who laugh, and you will find your leadership will be much more impactful,
Yeah.
and lasting.
Let me ask, you referenced 45 years of ministry, and you've said many times that your bent is towards the movement. So how did you learn this? When did you learn this?
Um, it was a process. I don't think I woke up one day and fixed it. Nor do I mean to imply that I always did it perfectly. Please, I'm not saying that. Um, but I got better at it because I tried it. It was a journey. It, it was watching other famous pastors implode. Okay, that helped me. My own church home pastor became very uh, harsh and um, moved this church forward and kind of like calling people out. And this was a guy I like worshipped. Probably, maybe that's too strong of a word, but and then somewhere here he called me out. on some stupid legalistic thing. And it hurt like the dickens, but I could see this high leadership mode that he was in, right? Well, come to find out, we went away on our honeymoon. He helped assist in our wedding. My parents called me up after our honeymoon and said, "Are you sitting down? We have some terrible news." And I said, "What, did grandma die or did grandpa die? Like what could be bad?" And they said, "No, it's worse than that. Our pastor just ran away with a woman in the church and he's been having an affair for multiple years." Well, all of a sudden the light bulbs went on. Okay. Like this harshness, this meanness, this do it my way. It showed a character flaw. That was not of the Holy Spirit. And I said to myself, you can't end up like that. So, and then, I didn't learn it perfectly and I surely didn't do it right. But then we've watched that, haven't we, now in history now?
We
There's
have.
been several that have imploded like this. And I went, there again. Okay, Lord, I got it. I'm watching. You help me. I want to do better in this. And so it was a journey of watching others implode and saying, that can't happen to me.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how the experience of his leadership was betraying the character underneath. And even
And
though the
nobody really
fruit
got
may
it at
yeah,
first,
yeah,
but it does. It shows um, and if your theological convictions aren't making you more gracious, humble, and repentant,
yeah,
then
yeah,
something is wrong. And then
something's wrong.
the other problem is I love people so much, and they may not like me if I call them out. Well, God may not like you on Judgment Day, so to speak, right? We're going to be called. We're going to be called accountable for calling people to faithful living and obedient living, and you have to look yourself in the mirror, and you have to look God in the face and say, God, I want to get this balance right. I'm going to go talk to this person. I know my own heart. I screw up. Help me. I want to do this right. I want my tone to be right. I want my attitude to be right. Um, and then on the other hand, you've gone slow, you've worked hard, you've listened, and you say, it's the right thing to do. We're going to move forward with this project. And if people leave the church, I think I have to do it because we've given plenty of time to accommodate everything. And so there are times when you still have to move forward, even if not everybody is going to like everything you do, either side of this equation, 100% of the time.
Let me just ask as we kind of are starting to kind of land the plane, conclude our
Yep.
conversation. A pastor spends so much of his life caring for others. Um, who needs to be close enough to care for the pastor?
Mm. That's maybe the hardest question you've asked, although doing the other things we've talked about is very, very hard. When I came here, there was a man, a layman in our church, PhD, actually a school psychologist, godly man. And um, he ended up being the chairman of our board for probably the first 15 years, off and on. He would take some years off. But he and I had a relationship where he could graciously, he was so sweet, but he would graciously, um, in my performance review, he could always give me a few words of encouragement, lots of encouragement, to be honest with you. But he could also say graciously, here's an area you might want to work on. And he did me such a favor by pointing out a couple occasionally. I mean, it was just enough that it made me better. Trust me, I did after, all the nice things he said, the only thing I thought about that night was the one thing I wasn't doing wrong.
Right, right.
I mean,
Here's the one thing you can work on. Now I'm
yeah, I
consumed
mean,
by it.
but I also knew the guy loved me and he wanted me to get better. And I either could get mad at him for pointing out the obvious, or and these were not big things. Like this wasn't like huge. One year he said, Interesting in light of everything else I've said. One year he said, I've heard from some of our senior citizens that they don't feel they get enough pastoral attention, the shut-ins. And I went, "Man, I've visited several," you get self-defensive.
Right, of course.
And I thought, "You either can figure out how we're gonna get better at that or not, and quit trying to defend yourself." And so we did. We found a way to address that, and if he hadn't pointed it out to me, and I'm gonna tell you, he loved me enough to point out a
Right.
weakness in the ministry. So
Yep.
a layperson that can do that for you, that you trust, and that has your best interest is a gift from God. Maybe not every pastor has those. I hope a wife could do that. Um, my wife could. Some wives maybe, depending on their wiring pattern, but uh, my wife was never impressed by my job description or the fact that people liked me at church to say, You're out of bounds. You need to do that."
What would you say to a pastor who maybe is feeling caught in the middle, caught between caring for people and moving the church forward?
I would say, welcome to pastoral ministry. That is, if you're in the
Amen.
middle, you're probably in the right spot. And maybe some days, you're going to err on one or the other a little bit because you're human and you're never going to be perfect. But fight that fight of tension. Ask the questions. Ask others how how they think you're doing in those areas. And if you're going to go confront somebody else, ask some other godly people. Do you see
Mhm.
this in their area? Don't do this all alone. Share that certainly with others. And and know that if you're prone to not want to confront, that your lack of addressing with clarity what people are supposed to do and then holding them accountable to it, what you don't confront becomes the rule. It becomes the way people will live. It's the norm now. And you kind of have to occasionally go, no, no, we don't do this and we don't do this. We're going to be right in here. And you define the areas that you're going to be in. And those hard moments, they're hard, but those hard moments will set you up for many successful years of pastoral ministry.
I love that. Chip, thank you so much for your wisdom. I know that so many people have thanked you for your years of service, but I thank you that you're continuing to pour out for the pastors that are engaged and connected to the church hub. We really appreciate you and really appreciate your time today. So
Thank you,
thanks
Brian.
so much. Have a great day.